What if the women they hanged in Salem never actually died but were waiting for the perfect moment to return? Before we descend into the most disturbing case of supernatural revenge in New England history, drop a comment below and tell us from where you are watching. Have you ever felt watched by something that remembers crimes committed generations ago, sensed that your bloodline carries a debt that must be paid, or woken in the night knowing that the past was finally coming to collect what it's owed? Keep that feeling close. Because today we're venturing into Salem, Massachusetts, where the witch trials of 1692 cast shadows that reach into the present day, and where the Blackwood family discovered that some sins echo through time until justice is finally, terribly served. It's October 2019 in Salem, Massachusetts, a coastal city approximately 16 miles north of Boston, whose very name has become synonymous with persecution, mass hysteria, and innocent blood spilled in the name of religious fanaticism. Every October, hundreds of thousands of tourists flood Salem's narrow cobblestone streets, drawn by the macabre allure of the witch trials that claimed 19 lives in 1692 and destroyed countless families in their aftermath. But beneath the commercialized horror, something genuine and terrifying lurks in Salem's shadows. This is about the Blackwood family, direct descendants of Magistrate Thomas Blackwood, one of the primary judges who condemned innocent people to death during the trials. And this is about what happened when 3 centuries of accumulated rage finally found its target in October 2019. The story begins in 1692, in the depths of a Massachusetts winter that seemed to mirror the coldness spreading through Salem village. The witch trials erupted in January when several young girls began experiencing what witnesses described as fits and convulsions that the local physician attributed to witchcraft. That single diagnosis ignited a firestorm that would consume Salem for nearly a year. The accusations began with society's most vulnerable members. Sarah Good, a homeless beggar. Sarah Osborne, an elderly woman whose illness kept her from church. And Tituba, an enslaved woman from Barbados whose foreign background made her an easy target. But the accusations metastasized with terrifying speed, eventually engulfing over 200 people from every level of society. At the center sat Magistrate Thomas Blackwood, whose role would forever stain his family's legacy with innocent blood. Blackwood presided over examinations with obsessive fervor, treating them not as fact-finding inquiries but as opportunities to extract confessions from people he had already decided were guilty. He employed leading questions designed to trap the accused in logical impossibilities from which there was no escape. Unlike other officials who later expressed doubt, Thomas Blackwood never wavered in his certainty. While judges like Samuel Sewall would publicly acknowledge their terrible mistakes, Blackwood went to his grave in 1721 still convinced he had been doing God's work, still certain that those he condemned deserved their fate. The executions took place on Gallows Hill, a barren rocky outcrop that seemed designed by nature for grim purposes. Between June and September 692, 19 people were hanged there in 5 separate execution days. Bridget Bishop was first on June 10th, maintaining her innocence with her final breath. July 19th brought 5 more executions, including Rebecca Nurse, a 71-year-old grandmother whose piety was legendary. 39 neighbors had signed a petition testifying to her good character, but Blackwood dismissed their testimony. Rebecca's final words were a prayer, asking God to forgive those who were murdering her. Also hanged that day was Sarah Good, whose 4-year-old daughter had been coerced into testifying against her. As the noose was placed around Sarah's neck, she cursed Reverend Noyes, telling him that if he took her life, God would give him blood to drink. 25 years later, Noyes died of a massive hemorrhage, blood pouring from his mouth. September 19th brought the final executions, including Mary Easty, who wrote a petition begging the judges to reconsider their methods before more innocent people died. Her plea was ignored. Between the hangings, Giles Corey, an 80-year-old farmer, was pressed to death under heavy stones when he refused to enter a plea. His only response? More weight. The trials ended in October 1692, not from conscience, but because accusations had reached too high into Massachusetts society. When the governor's own wife was accused, he dissolved the special court. But Thomas Blackwood never apologized. He continued living as a respected community member until his peaceful death in 1721. And the darkness that had accumulated around him didn't dissipate with his final breath. It passed down through his bloodline like an inherited disease. The Blackwood family prospered materially in the centuries following the trials, but beneath the surface, there were whispers. Stories about strange occurrences that plagued the family with disturbing regularity. Family members who died young under mysterious circumstances. Descendants who went mad, claiming to see things that shouldn't exist. In 1735, Jonathan Blackwood's eldest son died suddenly at age 25. His body was discovered with his face frozen in absolute terror, but the doctor found no cause of death. In 1762, Samuel Blackwood, a successful Boston lawyer, experienced a complete mental breakdown. He began claiming he saw women in his home, spectral figures in old-fashioned clothing who watched him with expressions of hatred. Samuel described them in precise detail. Their clothing was authentic to the late 17th century. Most disturbingly, he began speaking their names. When his family investigated, they discovered the names belonged to women executed during the witch trials. Women Thomas Blackwood had personally condemned. Samuel was committed to an asylum where he spent 4 years in constant terror, barely sleeping, claiming the women came every night. He died in 1766 at age 36, his mind destroyed. When asylum staff prepared his body, they discovered it covered in scratches and bruises that appeared overnight in his locked, padded cell. The marks looked like fingernails had created them. The pattern continued with grim consistency through the 18th and 19th centuries. An 1809 letter from Margaret Blackwood described seeing 3 women in her bedroom each night who appeared the moment she extinguished her candle. She described hearing voices in her mind telling her that the sins of the fathers are visited upon the children, that blood demands blood in payment. She died 3 weeks after writing that letter. In 1846, Nathaniel Blackwood legally changed his surname to Blackwell, hoping to escape the family's dark legacy. For several years, the strategy seemed successful. But in 1853, his 16-year-old daughter began experiencing vivid nightmares about the witch trials. She spoke of women who told her that changing a name meant nothing, that blood carried guilt deeper than any name could reach. Within months, she was dead, found in her locked bedroom with no medical cause. The curse continued through the 20th century, operating in shadow, claiming victims who didn't understand why tragedy followed their bloodline. Until October 2019, when the curse found the Blackwood family living in Salem itself, and everything that had been building for 3 centuries finally came to its terrible culmination. Catherine Blackwood had moved to Salem in October 2016 with her husband James and their 10-year-old daughter Emma. Catherine was a documentary filmmaker specializing in historical subjects, and Salem offered rich material for her work. She had no idea her family connected directly to the witch trials. Her maiden name had been Blackwood, but she had grown up in Oregon with no knowledge of her family's Massachusetts roots. The family purchased a house on Charter Street, just 3 blocks from where the preliminary examinations had occurred. The house dated to 1794, a federal-style structure with original wide plank floors and hand-hewn ceiling beams. The first 3 years passed without anything unusual occurring. But October 2019 brought changes that would shatter the family's understanding of reality. It began with Emma, now 13, experiencing nightmares. Not typical anxiety dreams, but vivid, historically accurate visions of the witch trials. She dreamed of standing in the Salem Village meeting house, watching terrified women being interrogated. She dreamed of the prison where accused witches were kept. She dreamed of Gallows Hill with terrible, precise clarity. The dreams were so specific that Emma began obsessively researching the trials. To her growing unease, many elements in her dreams matched historical records with disturbing precision. The layout of the meeting house corresponded exactly to archaeological evidence. The specific wording of questions matched transcripts she hadn't read. Even names of specific victims appeared in her dreams before she encountered them in research. Catherine attributed the dreams to Emma's inevitable exposure to Salem's tourism, explaining that the human brain absorbed more information than people consciously realized. But Emma felt the dreams were different, less like imaginative constructions and more like memories. James, working late from his home office, began noticing sounds in the house that shouldn't be there. Footsteps ascending the stairs when Catherine and Emma were both accounted for elsewhere. doors closing by themselves with careful, deliberate gentleness. The sensation of being watched became constant. He tried applying his engineer's logical mind to these experiences. Old houses made noises. Drafts could cause doors to move. The sensation of being watched was a well-documented psychological phenomenon. But the phenomena grew more frequent and harder to rationalize as October progressed. Catherine remained skeptical, her training as a filmmaker emphasizing evidence-based thinking. But her skepticism shattered completely on the night of October 15th. She was working late in the kitchen, editing footage on her laptop, absorbed in her work. Then she felt it, that unmistakable sensation of being watched. Catherine looked up, expecting to see Emma or James. Instead, she found herself looking at a woman standing motionless in the kitchen doorway. A woman who absolutely should not and could not be there. The woman wore colonial period clothing, a long dress made of rough, homespun fabric. Her face was aged and lined with suffering that seemed to have accumulated over impossible spans of time. Her eyes held an expression Catherine would later struggle to describe, something beyond simple anger or hatred, something that felt like centuries of accumulated pain and rage compressed into a single, terrible gaze. Catherine sat frozen, unable to move or speak, her rational mind trying desperately to process what her eyes were seeing. The woman didn't move, didn't speak, simply stood watching Catherine with those ancient, accusing eyes. The moment stretched, seconds feeling like minutes, until Catherine finally managed to draw breath to scream. The sound that emerged from her throat was raw and primal, terror-given voice. The woman vanished the instant Catherine screamed, not fading gradually, but simply ceasing to exist between one moment and the next, there and then gone, as if she had never been present at all. James came running down the stairs, flipping on lights as he descended, calling Catherine's name in alarm. Emma appeared moments later, stumbling from her bedroom with sleep-heavy eyes that quickly cleared when she saw her mother's condition. Catherine sat at the kitchen table, her laptop forgotten, her entire body shaking, her face drained of color. She told him what she had seen, her voice trembling, but her description precise and detailed. James held her, murmuring reassurances that felt hollow even as he spoke them, trying to find rational explanations that would comfort his wife and allow them all to believe the world still made sense. Maybe she had fallen asleep at her laptop and dreamed. Maybe stress and fatigue had caused a hallucination. Maybe reflected light from her screen had created an optical illusion. Her tired brain interpreted it as a human figure. But Emma went very still and quiet as Catherine described the woman. When her mother finished the description, Emma walked to her bedroom and returned, carrying her phone, her hands shaking as she navigated to a website she had bookmarked during her research. She held the phone out to Catherine, displaying an artist's sketch based on contemporary descriptions of one of the executed women. The resemblance was unmistakable. Catherine found herself looking at a rendering of the exact face she had just seen standing in her kitchen doorway. The woman was Rebecca Nurse, the 71-year-old grandmother who had died on Gallows Hill on July 19, 1692, praying for those who murdered her even as the noose was placed around her neck. The family spent the rest of that night together in the living room, all lights blazing, none of them willing to be alone or to sleep. As dawn finally broke over Salem, casting pale October light through the old house's windows, they began researching in earnest, searching for answers that might explain what was happening to them. Catherine turned her documentary skills to investigating her own family history, tracing her genealogy back through generations of moves and marriages that had obscured the connection to New England. James used his technical expertise to access genealogical databases and historical archives. Emma, with the focused intensity only a terrified teenager could muster, searched through every account of the witch trials she could find. What they discovered over the following days chilled them to their cores. Catherine's maiden name was Blackwood, her family line traced directly back to Magistrate Thomas Blackwood, the judge who had condemned Rebecca Nurse and 18 others to death. The connection that had been lost through generations of geographic dispersal and eroded family records was now clear and undeniable. They discovered the pattern of tragedies that had followed the family for 3 centuries. The mysterious deaths, the madness, the unexplained illnesses. They found Margaret's 1809 letter in digitized archives, read her description of the 3 women who appeared in her bedroom each night. They found records of Samuel Blackwood's commitment to the asylum in 1762, found notes from asylum staff describing his claims about seeing executed witches. The phenomenon in their own house intensified with each passing night. Emma's nightmares became more vivid and specific. She dreamed of standing on Gallows Hill, of watching Rebecca Nurse's final moments, of hearing her voice speak words of both forgiveness and warning. She began waking to find her room impossibly cold, her breath visible in air that shouldn't hold such chill in an old house with modern heating. James saw the woman too, standing at the top of the stairs one night when he went to investigate footsteps. She didn't vanish when he saw her, but remained present, watching him with those ancient eyes, and he understood in that moment that she wanted him to see her, wanted the family to understand they were being watched and judged. Other women began appearing. Catherine counted 3 distinct figures who manifested throughout the house. Emma's research identified them. Rebecca Nurse, Sarah Good, the homeless beggar who had cursed Reverend Noyes as the noose was placed around her neck, and Mary Easty, who had written the eloquent plea for the judges to reconsider their methods before more innocent people died. The 3 women who appeared most frequently in the historical accounts of descendants experiencing supernatural persecution. The 3 who seemed to carry the weight of all 19 executed souls, appointed somehow to exact vengeance on the bloodline of the man who had condemned them. The family tried to leave. On October 20th, they packed bags and prepared to abandon the house, to flee Salem and return to Oregon where Catherine had grown up, as far from New England and its dark history as they could get. But as they loaded the car, Emma collapsed, her body seizing in convulsions that terrified her parents. They rushed her to Salem Hospital, where doctors ran every test available, searching for neurological damage, checking for poisoning, looking for any medical explanation for what had happened. The test revealed nothing. Emma's brain function was normal. Her blood work showed no toxins. Physically, she was a healthy 13-year-old girl. But she remained unconscious for 3 hours, unresponsive to any stimulus. When Emma finally woke, she did so suddenly, sitting up in the hospital bed with her eyes wide and focused on something her parents couldn't see. She spoke in a voice that didn't sound entirely like her own, carrying weight and authority beyond her years. She told her parents they couldn't leave, that running was pointless, that the curse would follow them anywhere they went, just as it had followed Nathaniel Blackwood when he changed his name and fled to Connecticut, that the debt had to be paid one way or another, that 3 centuries was long enough to wait for justice. Catherine and James, sitting on either side of Emma's hospital bed, holding their daughter's hands and feeling more helpless than they had ever felt in their lives, asked what the curse wanted from them, what price would satisfy the dead, what payment would end 3 centuries of suffering. Emma closed her eyes, silent for long moments, then opened them again. When she spoke, her voice was her own again, young and frightened but determined. She said the women wanted acknowledgement. They wanted the truth told. They wanted Thomas Blackwood's crimes recognized and his victims honored. They wanted justice, even if it came 327 years too late. The family returned home from the hospital in the early hours of October 21st. The women were waiting. All 3 stood in the living room when the family entered, making no attempt to hide or fade into shadow. They wanted to be seen. They wanted to be acknowledged as real, as present, as still existing despite 3 centuries in unmarked graves. Catherine, drawing on courage she didn't know she possessed, addressed them directly. She acknowledged Thomas Blackwood's crimes. She spoke the names of all 19 executed victims, reading from a list Emma had prepared, giving voice to each person who had died on Gallows Hill. She apologized on behalf of her ancestor, knowing the words were inadequate but offering them anyway, hoping they carried some weight despite coming centuries too late. The women didn't respond, didn't move, simply continued watching with those ancient, terrible eyes. Catherine understood that words alone wouldn't be enough. The family spent the next 3 days working with desperate intensity. Catherine used her filmmaking skills to create a documentary, not for public release but as testimony, as acknowledgement. She recorded everything. The family's genealogical connection to Thomas Blackwood, the pattern of tragedies through the centuries, the phenomena they had experienced. Emma's dreams, the appearances of the 3 women. James used his technical skills to create a website, a memorial to the 19 executed victims. He compiled historical records, contemporary accounts, everything known about each person who had died. He included digitized documents showing Thomas Blackwood's role in the trials, his examination techniques, his refusal to apologize or acknowledge error even decades after the hysteria ended. Emma wrote letters, not to the living but to the dead. 19 letters, one for each victim, speaking directly to them, acknowledging their innocence, their suffering, the injustice of their deaths. She described her dreams, the nightmares that had shown her their final moments. She wrote that she was sorry, that she understood they had every right to their anger, that she bore no personal guilt but carried the burden of blood connection to the man who had murdered them. On October 24th, the family held a private ceremony in their living room. They lit 19 candles, one for each victim. Catherine read from the documentary script she had written, speaking each victim's story aloud, giving voice to lives that had been silenced on Gallows Hill. James read from historical accounts of the trials, including passages from Thomas Blackwood's own examination records, not to defend him, but to ensure his crimes were acknowledged in his own words. Emma read her letters aloud, her young voice steady despite tears streaming down her face, addressing each victim directly, speaking to them as if they stood present in the room. Because they did stand present. The three women remained throughout the ceremony, watching, listening, their expressions unchanging, but their presence somehow less threatening, less weighted with immediate violence. When Emma finished reading the final letter, addressed to Mary Easty, who had written her eloquent plea for the judges to reconsider before more innocent people died, the temperature in the room changed. The oppressive cold that had haunted the house for weeks lifted. The sensation of being watched by hostile presences faded. The three women remained visible, but their expressions had shifted, no longer showing only rage and accusation. Something else appeared in those ancient eyes. Not forgiveness, exactly. The dead who had been murdered couldn't be expected to forgive. But perhaps recognition, acknowledgement that this generation of Blackwoods had done what centuries of ancestors had refused to do. They had told the truth. They had admitted the crime. They had honored the victims. One by one, the women faded. Not vanishing abruptly, but gradually becoming translucent, their forms losing solidity until they were nothing but shadows, then nothing but memory. Rebecca Nurse was last to fade, standing the longest, her eyes locked on Emma with an expression the girl would spend the rest of her life trying to understand. Then she too was gone. The house felt different immediately. The oppressive atmosphere that had made every room feel weighted with unseen presence lifted. The temperature normalized. The sounds that had plagued James stopped. Emma, exhausted from weeks of nightmares and terror, slept through her first peaceful night in over a month. The Blackwood family remained in Salem. Catherine completed her documentary, expanding it from testimony to comprehensive historical record. She donated it to the Salem Witch Trials Memorial and the Massachusetts Historical Society, ensuring the Blackwood family's connection to the trials would be permanently recorded, that future generations couldn't lose the thread again. James maintained the memorial website, updating it with new research as historians made discoveries about the trials and their victims. Emma, as she grew older, became a volunteer at the Salem Witch Museum, telling visitors not just the general history but her family's specific story, ensuring that Thomas Blackwood's crimes and his victims' names remained in living memory. The supernatural phenomenon never returned with the intensity of October 2019, but occasionally, particularly around the anniversary dates of the executions, the family experienced subtle reminders, a temperature drop in a particular room, the sense of being watched, but watched with interest rather than hostility. The occasional glimpse of a figure in period clothing standing just at the edge of vision, gone when directly observed. Emma interpreted these experiences as reminders rather than threats. The dead weren't persecuting them anymore, but they were watching, ensuring the family kept its implicit promise to honor the victims and acknowledge the crimes. The curse, if it could be called that, had been broken. But the responsibility remained. The Blackwood family had learned what their ancestors refused to acknowledge, that some debts passed through bloodlines, that silence about historical crimes is its own form of guilt, and that justice, even delayed by 3 centuries, must eventually be served. The 19 souls hanged in Salem in 1692 had never left. They had waited with patient, terrible determination for descendants of their murderer to finally tell the truth. And in October 2019, after 327 years, they had gotten what they waited for. Not revenge. Not the suffering of innocence to match their own suffering. Simply recognition. Simply the truth spoken aloud by the bloodline that carried the guilt. Simply justice. Finally, terribly served. If you're ever in Salem, particularly in October when the shadows seem to carry weight and the past feels closer than comfortable, visit the Salem Witch Trials Memorial on Charter Street. Read the names carved in stone. Rebecca Nurse, Sarah Good, Mary Easty. All 19 who died because of fear and certainty and religious fanaticism. Say their names aloud. Acknowledge their innocence. Honor their memory. Because some of them are still watching. Still waiting. Still ensuring that their stories, their truth, their justice is never forgotten again. And if you feel watched while you stand at that memorial, if the temperature seems to drop despite warm October sun, if you glimpse a figure in old-fashioned clothing standing just at the edge of your vision, don't be afraid. They're not angry anymore. They just want to be remembered. They just want the truth to be told. They just want justice, even if it comes 333 years too late. The Blackwood family learned that lesson in October 2019, and they've been teaching it to anyone who will listen ever since. Because the past never stays buried. Not in Salem, not anywhere. It waits, it watches, and eventually it collects what it's owed.